Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about how to prove trig identities. This is going to be about a 4-part series. In this first section, we're going to first start off by discussing some of the tools that you will need to have memorized in order to prove these identities. Alright, so what I have written here first is the Pythagorean identity. What it tells us is that if you take any angle and you find the cos of it, and then you square it, and to that you add the sine of the same angle and you square it, you will always get the sum of 1. When you're proving trig identities, sometimes you're going to see this expression and you're going to replace it with 1. And sometimes you're going to see the number 1 and it will help you to prove your identity if you replace the number 1 with cos squared x plus sine squared x. Knowing this, so it looks like an equation. Knowing this, it allows us to isolate either cos squared x or sine squared x. So we use our tools from math where you move something to the other side, you change its sign. So if I simply want to know what cos squared x is, move the sine squared to the other side and it becomes a minus. So cos squared of an angle is equal to 1 minus sine squared of the same angle. In the same way, we can do the same thing for sine squared. So simply by moving the cos squared to the other side, we get that sine squared is equal to 1 minus cos squared. These are going to be the most important tools that you use to prove trig identities. That's why I put them down first. You do not need to memorize all 3 of those. As long as you know this one, you can generate the other 2. Okay, so you need to be comfortable with those. We are given relationships for cos squared and sine squared. This by no means tells me that cos x is equal to 1 minus sine x or something like that. Okay, don't ever try to do that. Okay, it is not true. Okay, moving further down, we have what's referred to as reciprocal identities. When you started your work with trig and you were solving right triangles and non-right triangles, you did a lot of work with cos, sine, and tan. These are referred to as your primary trig ratios. They are the ones that have buttons on the calculator. We then have 3 secondary trig ratios, which are called secant, cosecant, and cotangent. Secant is the reciprocal of cos, so we write it as 1 over cos. Cosecant is the reciprocal of sine, 1 over sine. Cotangent is the reciprocal of tangent, we write it as 1 over tan. These again will be very, very important because when we are proving our trig identities, we are going to see that it's in our best interest to rewrite everything in terms of the primary trig ratios, especially cos and sine. So we will want to get rid of these secondary ones, the secant and the cosecant. Then finally it brings us down to the third one, which I've written as the quotient identities. Tan of an angle is equal to the ratio of the sine of the angle over the cos of the angle. And again, we will want to get rid of this whenever possible and replace it with these 2. Because cotan is the reciprocal of tangent, if tangent sine over cos, then cotangent is cos over sine. Okay, so these are the main rules and tools that you will need in order to prove your identities. So you're going to have to memorize these, so it's not too many, and then you will use these in doing your proofs. Okay, the next thing I want to put up for you is kind of some simple rules to go by in proving these identities. And if you use these little rules, it will help you a lot in proving these identities. Okay, first thing, you're going to be given an identity to prove. It looks like an equation, but you do not treat it like an equation. There will be something on the left side and there will be something on the right side. What you first need to determine is which side do I want to work with. And rule of thumb, you want to work with the messy side. Okay, what that means is when I say the messy side, you want to work with the side that has the most stuff on it. Because it's always easier to go from a lot of stuff down to something small, a little bit harder to go from, let's say, a single term and build it up to multiple terms. So that's our first rule. Okay, so you're going to want to work with the messy side. Okay, a second rule. Anything that's not written in terms of sine and cos, you want to change it into that. So we want to write everything in terms of sine and cos. Okay, so we want to do that. We want to write everything in terms of sine and cos. Okay, so if we get secant, cosecant, tangent, or cotangent, we will want to get rid of those at some point and replace them with sine and cos. And then the third thing, all of the math that you've learned up to this point, you want to remember. And some key things that you will want to remember that will help you in proving these trig identities is your factoring skills. Okay, so you'll want to remember how to factor. So you want to remember how to factor common factors. You will want to remember how to do difference of squares. And you'll also want to remember how to factor trinomials, whether they're simple trinomials or complex trinomials. So that's one thing. Also, you will be given some rational expressions, which are trig rational expressions. So in between these rational expressions, you could have a plus or minus sign. So what you need to remember is when you're dealing with those, you need to get a common denominator. Okay, so don't forget those rules of how to add and subtract fractions. Okay, because that's what we're going to be dealing with. All right, this is going to end the first part of our session. I'm going to come back in a second and we're going to actually start doing some examples. So I'll do probably 2 or 3 sessions on just examples, and those examples are going to get harder as we progress, and I'll show you a few little tricks that you can use in order to prove them. And the best way to get proficient with these proving trig identities is by practicing. Just by simply watching your teacher do it or watching videos online, it's not going to be enough. You need to get some paper out, get a pen out, and sit down and actually try to work these. For some of you, you're going to absolutely love these because they are like little puzzles. Others, not going to like it so much. It's kind of a love-hate thing. You either really love it or you really hate it. This particular topic is in a couple of the grades that you have to do in grade 11 and grade 12. So you have to embrace it and you have to try to understand it. Don't look at it and say, oh, I can't do this. Okay, with these little tools that I'm giving you, anybody should be able to prove these trig identities. Okay, so that's the end of our first video.